YouTube is, of course, blowing up with discussion on both the left and the right about where we are heading with the 2020 presidential campaign, who will be in, who will be out, and whether any candidate will truly energize a base.
Recently at Politicon, I caught up with YouTuber Kyle Kulinski, friend of the show. We talked about the 2020 campaign, the changing media landscape. Let's take a look. Kyle, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, man. I appreciate it.
Great to actually see you in person, so this
is
the fun part.
It's a rare thing. It's like seeing an albatross or something.
Yes, exactly. You don't have your headphones in and the map in the background. But
exactly, yeah.
This is a little bit cooler. So let's talk a little bit about why you're here, Kyle. You're here at Politicon. You've been talking to all these different panels. You've really been somebody who's outspoken on the progressive voice, and you seem to have touched a lot of people. Why do you think that is? What are you trying to get across while you're here?
I don't know. I think that I just talk like a regular person, and I think people naturally gravitate towards that because they're tired of the old school politician cadence and people who feel like they're really special or whatever.
Sure.
I don't feel like I'm special. I'm like a political junkie, and I like reading the news, and I like following this stuff. And I think that shows that I genuinely care about it, and I like following it. But the way I connect to people, I don't talk down to people, I just talk like a regular person, and I think people see that and they respect that and they like that. And hopefully people just agree with me on the things that I think are important and the policies that I'm pushing for.
Right. So Kyle, you've really been outspoken here on our show as well, talking about the differences between Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren. It's been a hot topic while we're here. How are you seeing those differences play out as this primary continues?
Well, I mean, you can only fake it for so long, you know? And in the case of Warren, I think there are issues where she's genuinely good. And you know, you get that sense when she talks about those issues. Like, for example, I think on trade, I think on Wall Street reform, she really cares about that, and she's willing to fight for that. But you do see that there's just a lack of interest in other areas, like healthcare, like Medicare for all. There's a reason why, you know, Mrs. I have a plan for everything doesn't have a plan for that. You know, you don't get to this point in the primary, this deep in an election, without having a plan on something like that, which is, honestly, according to polling, the #1 issue for the American people. So, yeah, I think you can only fake it for so long, and the truth is going to come out. And she has had contradictory statements on this. When it comes to foreign policy, not only is it just questionable, I think she's flat out wrong on a lot of foreign policy stuff. She's very hawkish, like a standard centrist Democrat, and that just doesn't align with my politics. And I think that, especially since the commander-in-chief has the most control over that realm of policy, you got to be there on that on that issue, and she's just not.
So what about foreign policy in particular do you think she's hawkish
on? Well, Bernie has come out and said repeatedly, you know, well, he voted against the Iraq War, he led the charge against the Iraq War. I just don't see her talking about war at all.
Yeah.
Have you seen any statements on it? I haven't seen anything on Afghanistan. I haven't seen anything on Iraq. Maybe if she does bring it up, it's just a tepid thing here or there. I think on Israel-Palestine, been very weak on that. Bernie was very upfront when he said, hey, listen, if we're going to be subsidizing Israel, you better allow in Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, you better allow in Ilhan Omar, you better allow in Rashida Tlaib, because Netanyahu was threatening to not allow them in because they voiced tepid agreement with BDS or something like that? Yeah. Right. So she's just absent on that. She's nowhere to be found. And usually what will happen is after a sufficient amount of pressure, then she'll give like a little head fake in that direction and say, well, yeah, I guess maybe it should kind of be on the table or whatever. She also implied that it was Iran who violated the Iran deal, when of course it was the U.S. who violated the Iran deal. It's hilarious that we pulled out of the deal and then we turn around and berate them when they violate the terms of the deal after we pulled out of it. Like, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard in my life. But she agrees with that framing, and that's the framing in virtually all of Washington, D.C. And what you see is that Bernie's willing to buck that framing and stand up to what everybody is saying, and she's not. On those issues, she's willing to go along to get along.
So, Kyle, one of the most interesting dynamics, I think, here at Politicon is that you have these, like, old war horses, James Carville and all these other people, and then we have people like Anas Kasparian and yourself representing the new left. I can say from, you know, just from a mild observation, there's a bit more enthusiasm for the new left than the old. Why do you think that it is? Because if you watch the media, you would have no idea that much of this even exists.
Yeah, I don't want to be too rude here, but I do think that they're like artificially propped up a little bit. I think that in order to make it in the medium that I'm on and the medium you're on, it really is like a genuine free marketplace.
Right.
You start with $0 and 0 cents in advertising money. You start with 0 viewers, 0 followers and subscribers, and it's like, hey man, go at it, go ahead. Right. Let's see how far you can get. And the joke I made last night when I was on stage, it's not really a joke, it's true, is that I'd love to see Wolf Blitzer with a YouTube channel. start him with 0 subscribers, say, go ahead, man, we'll give you 2 years, let's see how far you get. He would get nobody. And it's because he already has this billion-dollar behemoth behind him. They've selected him to be a guy on air. By the way, there's a reason they select him, because he's not going to rock the boat. He's not going to say anything remotely interesting. And so they have a disadvantage. They have the advantage of having all the institutional backing, all the money, and they're forced out there. But their disadvantage is they don't have that real enthusiasm that I have, that I think you and Crystal have, because they're not actually grinding it out there in the free marketplace of ideas and actually gaining a genuine following.
That's very spot on. That's exactly right. Which is, so many of these people are propped up by the institution that picked them, rather than having their audience with a direct connection. Now, this isn't just media, it connects to politics too, right? Which is that so much of our politics now is between the politician and the supporter, whereas the traditional mediums have really eroded. How have you seen that play out in 2020 in particular?
Yeah, I mean, well, this is where you got the rise of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. There's a reason why she has, I think she may have the most followers of anybody in Congress. And she's a freshman congresswoman.
Right.
And, I like how Nancy Pelosi tries to downplay her significance and her importance, and she makes these pithy comments like, oh yeah, when it's just because the demographics of the district made it like she was going to win. She had a 10-to-1 money disadvantage. It was no guarantee she was going to win at all. But yeah, this is why you see politicians like her thriving. This is why you see Bernie Sanders has become a force, and he's the real movement candidate with the real grassroots support, is because now we have mediums where we can go right to the people. We don't need to have that arbitrary filter in the middle that kind of puts their spin on it.
Right.
And, and listen, you got to say it's true about Trump as well. Trump is a guy who, even though I have massive disagreements with him, you can't say he doesn't cut out the middleman and go right to, and that's the thing, is he can relentlessly push his narrative out there because there is no filter on Twitter, and he can say whatever he wants to say. So I honestly think it's changing politics in a way, because it's making it so that you get a more raw element. And I think in part, it's responsible for ushering in this new populist era where the Mitt Romney type characters and the people who are too on script, they're just kind of like slowly but surely going away.
Their day is done. So the last question for you, Kyle, this is something I hit to every progressive lefty, which is, look, movement, revolution, that's all great, but you actually have to get something passed through Congress. And it doesn't seem that Bernie and a lot of his supporters have much of a grasp on the amount of technocracy that's involved when a lot of this stuff happens. What would your response to that be?
So first of all, that's a really great question, and I'm happy you asked it. But what I always say on that is you have to have an outside-inside game, and that's exactly why I care so much about getting Bernie elected, and why I think Warren is no substitute, is because Bernie has said in no uncertain terms, when I interviewed him, he said, no, absolutely. Like, I will go to West Virginia and I will rally against Joe Manchin if he blocks Medicare for all. I will use my popularity as president after having just gotten elected, go to his state, call him out and say, you know what? I'm going to support a primary against you if you don't back my agenda. So, I'm a big believer in taking on whoever you have to take on to get done what you have to get done. And if that means making enemies in your own party, fine, make the enemies in your own party, because you need to harness the will of the people in favor of the things that we know they already want according to the polls. 80% want to raise the minimum wage, 62% want to legalize marijuana. It's only some preposterously low number, like only 12% want to still be in Iraq or Afghanistan.
Right.
So these are things where the people are already there. Now it's time to do the outside-inside game where Bernie calls for a general strike. Let's go march on Washington. Here are the things that we're asking for. And then he's our ally in the White House, pushing these things nonstop and relentlessly, dotting the I's and crossing the T's where he has to, which is the technocracy that you were talking about.
Yeah, well, that's one way it might happen. Kyle, thank you so much for joining me. Really
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely.